A waitress from the United Kingdom would walk to her job every day. She would regularly pass homeless people, begging for food. One homeless man in particular struck her as deserving of some extra attention and love. She saw that the man was going through some hard times, so she decided to help him. To her, this was her moral duty. To him, it was so much more. When Daisy found out who this homeless person was, she was in complete shock. It was absolutely unbelievable. Curious to find out more, Daisy worked as a waitress in a restaurant and walked the same route to work every day. For a while, she always saw a homeless person sitting in the same spot near her work. No matter what the weather was like, he always sat in the same spot with a lonely look in his eyes. Daisy thought the man always looked very lonely. Still, the man himself didn't seem to mind. He was always in a good mood and smiling at everyone who passed by. In fact, he never asked for help or money. All he wanted was to chat. Daisy thought this was admirable, but also thought the man was keeping his real feelings to himself. The reason Daisy thought this was because she'd seen that not everyone was always nice to him. She had often seen people walking past him without even looking at him. She sometimes even noticed that an entire day would go by without a single person stopping to chat with the man. In fact, it sometimes even happened that people laughed at the man. Daisy also once saw a group of boys spit into the man's cup, something Daisy had a hard time seeing and understanding. One day, Daisy decided enough was enough. The man was always kind to everyone, and it was time someone gave him something nice in return. She hated that the man was being treated like this. In her eyes, the man was not worth anything less than anyone else, and she decided that she wanted to encourage the man. Daisy herself worked as a waitress in one of the United Kingdom's fanciest restaurants. The restaurant had managed to get no fewer than 2 Michelin stars, and nothing but high quality is expected in the restaurant. Daisy was a waitress herself, but had the dream to one day start working in the kitchen. She was studying to become a chef, and with this part-time job, she could pay for her education and gain experience at the same time. The food served in the restaurant where Daisy works is certainly not cheap. Guests spend a few £100s a night. This was sometimes difficult for Daisy to understand, because right around the corner, the homeless men slept every day. The difference between rich and poor was painfully visible. Curious what Daisy wanted to do to make help out? Keep watching the video to find out. Daisy didn't necessarily like her job. She mainly did it so she could pay the bills, save for college, and gain experience in the culinary industry. Yet most of all, she felt powerless. She didn't think it was fair that people were spending hundreds of pounds a night when people were starving a few feet away. She decided to take action. She just had to try and do this unseen, because if her boss found out about her plans, she could lose her job. Unfortunately, her boss, the chef of the restaurant, was present on the restaurant floor. She could hear his yelling to the kitchen staff from afar. Still, she went through with her plan. The plan was to take food from the restaurant and cook something delicious with it. She had to be careful though. The ingredients of her work are very expensive. Even the olives cost a lot of money. So she had to be very careful that nobody would find out. If her boss realized that she had stolen food, she would immediately lose her job. Daisy didn't feel comfortable stealing ingredients, but it also felt justified to her. She saw it as a Robin Hood situation in which she could contribute to a step in the right direction. Her intentions were good, but stealing is still bad, and she was only too aware of the risk she was taking here. Despite her nervousness, Daisy persevered with her plan. She heard her terrible boss yell at the kitchen staff and knew exactly where he was. This was the perfect time to sneak into the freezer. While she was secretly trying to get closer to the freezer, she heard her boss ranting at her colleagues. Succeeding would feel so good, purely because her boss was making everyone's life miserable in the workplace. Finally, Daisy managed to get into the freezer unseen. She was searching for food that wouldn't be missed and eventually managed to pack as many as 20 ingredients into her bag. This may sound like a lot, but Daisy knew exactly how much would get noticed and how much wouldn't. She packed just enough to make something tasty for the homeless person. Daisy couldn't believe her luck until she heard a loud knock on the freezer door while she was still inside. Daisy was sure she had been caught and she would lose her job. Her heartbeat skyrocketed and a feeling of fear crept over her. The chef realized someone was in the freezer. Normally, no one is allowed in there alone except himself. All the other kitchen staff always had to bring someone with them when they wanted to go into the cold room. The chef quickly realized that there was someone in the cold store without being asked. Daisy was in a complete panic. She had to get out of the cold room as quickly as possible, but she had nowhere to go. The chef was standing at the door and Daisy could already feel where this was going. Tears were in her eyes. Losing her job would mean that she no longer had any income and would not be able to pay for her culinary studies. In addition, she would acquire a bad reputation in the culinary world and not be able to find a new job quickly. Wondering if Daisy really lost her job? Then continue watching. Unable to move, the waitress lost all hope. The feeling of despair and panic crept over her as she realized she had to give up her passion, the culinary world. She crept back into the cold room to hide and leaned against the back wall. While waiting for the chef to catch her, something bizarre happened. The wall Daisy was leaning against was of poor quality. In recent years, that part of the wall had become damaged and weak. As she leaned against it, that section of the wall gave way and Daisy fell through the wall and ended up in the hallway of the restaurant. No one had seen her fall because it was in a sheltered area where mostly the waitresses walked. Daisy couldn't believe her luck. Daisy put her tray in front of the hole in the wall and managed to escape with all the ingredients she had stolen. She was just in time because she heard the chef walk into the freezer while Daisy had just covered her tracks. All she would be left with was a bruise, but that was worth it to her. She had never walked home so quickly after a day at work. The waitress was finally able to get to work on her plan. However, things turned out differently than expected. Only when she got home did Daisy dare to breathe out loud again. She now knew for sure that she was safe and that she could get to work, cooking with the stolen ingredients. She went straight to work and spent more than 2 hours in the kitchen cooking a delicious meal for the man. And she succeeded. When she could finally carry out her plan and give her home-cooked meal to the homeless person, she was overjoyed. Not only had she provided him with a meal, but also with some money so that he could buy some more things with if he needed it. The man was so surprised that he was completely stunned. He told her that he had never experienced such kindness. Daisy knew she had made the right choice and took her plan one step further. Nothing could break the waitress's good mood. Not even her mean and stern boss. Daisy decided to offer the homeless person warm home-cooked meals for the rest of the week. The man thought the meals were delicious. Daisy and the man were both overjoyed until one day her chef shows up at her door. Daisy was very shocked when she saw the chef standing at the door and knew immediately that she had been caught. She hesitated to open the door, but he had already seen her. The chef would never come to just visit, so Daisy opened the door of her house with trembling hands. Her boss was incredibly angry. He had discovered the tray in front of the broken wall and knew immediately that it belonged to her. Wondering what happened to Daisy? When the chef had found the tray, he decided to look at the camera images. In these images, he had seen that Daisy had secretly been hiding in the cold store. He also saw the bag with ingredients when he looked at the camera images. There was little time or space for Daisy to say anything. The chief yelled, "You're fired," when the front door opened. Then Daisy was given a 15-minute lecture on why he was in charge and why she should obey him. In the end, Daisy caught only about half of the lecture because she stopped listening. She could only think of the dire consequences of her actions. While her boss was raging, Daisy saw her whole future pass her by. Without a job, she could never pay for culinary studies. In fact, she would never get a job again with a reference like that. She had never foreseen what would happen after her dismissal. The day after being fired, Daisy walked past her former workplace. She peeked through the window, and a feeling of grief overcame her. She felt so stupid and found it difficult to clear her mind. When she started to walk away, she saw the homeless person sitting in his usual spot. As always, he was waiting for someone to talk to him, so Daisy decided to have a chat. Soon after, she found out who the person really was. The homeless person asked Daisy why she looked so sad, and she explained the situation to him. "That's horrible. They can't just fire you, Daisy," he replied. Daisy looked at him with wide eyes. How did this homeless man know her name? She was sure had never told him. "How do you know my name?" she asked. The homeless man looked shocked. He had made a big mistake. He had never planned to let Daisy know he knew her from more than just these acts of kindness. How was he going to talk himself out of this? When the homeless person revealed who he really was, Daisy was left shocked. The homeless man decided she had a right to know. He revealed his identity to Daisy, which left her speechless. She had not expected the homeless man to be who he turned out to be. In her mind, this seemed impossible. She had so many questions. "I am your grandfather. My name is Theodore," the homeless man said. Daisy's mouth hung open in confusion as she processed what she had just heard. "But you are supposed to have never come back from the war," she said. "You've been gone for decades. There was a funeral and everything. How was this possible?" Theodore, Daisy's homeless grandfather, explained. "I was captured by the enemy and was only able to come back to the UK after 15 years. When I came back, my wife, your grandmother, had already remarried. They held a funeral and were used to life without me." Why didn't he say anything? "It was impossible for me to announce my return. My wife, or well, ex-wife, looked so happy, and I had done some terrible things during the war. She was better off without me. So I decided to do what they expected me to do, stay dead. I took a few odd jobs here and there, but I had seen too much to keep them. I turned to alcohol, and look where I ended up." Theodore looked incredibly sad, talking about his life after the war. But still, this didn't explain everything. Everything would soon make sense. Still, I had always kept an eye on the family. It has been easier in recent years. I've simply had to log into Facebook on the computer at the local library. That's why I knew what you looked like, Daisy. Still, it was an enormous coincidence to see you walking past on your way to work. I couldn't believe my eyes. And imagine my happiness when you turned out to be the only person to care about me, without even knowing who I really was." Theodore started crying. "Thank you, Daisy." Daisy couldn't believe her eyes and ears. This man, the homeless man who she'd been feeding, he was her grandfather. This must be some kind of miracle, she thought. She gave Theodore a big hug and immediately called her grandmother. Her grandmother, of course, didn't believe what Daisy was telling her, so she decided to show her undeniable proof. The next day, she took Theodore to her grandmother's house. This amazing reunion took many hours because they had so much to tell each other. Daisy's grandmother could not believe that the husband she thought she'd lost had been alive all this time, and that he'd been so lonely and miserable on the streets. She promised to look after him for the rest of her life and offered him a place to stay at her house. Theodore never again had to sleep on the streets.